Welcome, everybody. My name is David Nash-Mendez. I work in the Access to Funding department at the Global Fund. And today, we will walk you through 4 of the required annexes as a part of the funding request package for Grant Cycle 8. Again, please use the question and answers function to ask questions. We will save your questions and ask them to our experts at the end. Recordings and slides will be available soon on the information sessions page of the country resources section of the Global Fund website. So the order that we will go through these annexes today, we'll start with the funding landscape tables, then continue to the performance framework. We'll go to the detailed budget and with some information on the health product management template. We will go then to the programmatic gap tables, and then as promised, we will close with some questions and answers. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so opening us up is me. So let's go to the next slide, and we will talk about the full review for Grant Cycle 8. Just to start, we are going to be talking about the requirements for the full review, which is for core and high impact portfolios in Grant Cycle 8. Requirements will be differentiated for focus portfolios, and we will not be covering these differences today. So if a lot of the information will be the same, but what will be specifically for focus portfolios, we will cover at our information session, which we have scheduled in March. And at the end of the session, we will give you the date for that. You can also go to the Global Fund's website on the information sessions page and have more information about this session for focused portfolios. So as I mentioned in the session just a few weeks ago on applying for core and high impact using the full review, we approached the development of requirements for the full review for Grant Cycle 8 with the principles of only asking for information when we need it and ideally only asking for it once. For the forms, we had a 60% reduction in pages. And we hope today, as we go through the different annexes that are required, that you can see that there is a bit less work required for these than there was in Grant Cycle 7. To learn more about the full review application package, I recommend you watch the recording of applying as core and high impact portfolios with the full review, which is available on the information sessions page of the website. Let's go to the next slide, please. So again, here are the required annexes for the full review funding request package. And today we will be focusing on the performance framework, the detailed budget, the funding landscape table, and the programmatic gap tables. And so with that, let's go to the next slide on the funding landscape table. And I will hand things off to Matt McGregor.
Thanks so much, David, and lovely to be here today. My name is Matt McGregor, and I work with the Health Finance Department here at the Global Fund Secretariat. And I'm going to chat really briefly about the funding landscape table. So one of the most important focuses for GC8 is really going to be understanding the financing landscape in which we are developing and approving Global Fund grants. And the funding landscape table is a critical tool and a mandatory funding requirement annex that enables applicants to provide information about the sources of finance for the national disease response and health systems. It's used really closely with the programmatic gap table to support country dialogue on the domestic financing of the national responses, as well as to support the transition and sustainability efforts and conversations at the country level. It's really critical because it helps CCMs and the Global Fund partnership overall to understand a few really important things. The overall gaps in disease-specific financing. Where is it that we're not seeing enough financing, either from external or domestic sources? The available financing for specific programmatic interventions. So as we drill down and look at the national response more specifically, and as we think about transitioning specific interventions to domestic financing, it helps us understand the current financing of those specific interventions. It helps us support grant design, so we can really think about where to best use Global Fund financing to address some of those gaps. And it supports the design of co-financing commitments. The funding landscape tool the table is not the tool that captures the formal final co-financing commitments, but it helps us understand the landscape of financing so we can work closely with countries to develop those commitments. Next slide. So what does it do and what does it collect? So the funding landscape overall illustrates the total funding need for national responses. It includes RSSH, and it includes past and future expenditure estimates, the different sources of financing, and it's designed in a way that helps us see the funding gaps. It's also really critical as we use this in GC8 to think about how we use it with the programmatic gap table that my colleague Yura is going to talk about in a little bit, because they work together to really help us understand how are we reaching the programmatic targets and how are we financing our ability to reach those targets. So what does the financing information collect? What does the FLT collect? A number of things. It collects the total funding need for each disease response at an aggregate level. And this is both historical and projected forward, and it's broken down by individual funding sources. So what's coming from domestic financing, what's coming from non-global fund external financing. It captures the total funding for specific interventions within the disease responses, projected forward. So understanding the financing across those individual interventions and the projections about what countries think they're going to be spending on moving forward. It also captures the total funding specifically for prioritized health products. We know that a very large amount of Global Fund grants are spent on health products. And so the tool helps us look at the overall funding for specific health products. And it also captures overall government health investments, broken down by source and also projected forward, and funding for specific RSSH priorities. So it's a tool that captures a whole variety of financing information about the financing of the national response in the health system. Next slide, please. In line with David's principles, we've worked hard to try to differentiate the use of the tool and make it more streamlined for Grant Cycle 8. So it's the same tool as in Grant Cycle 7, but there's greater differentiation in how we're using it, and it's more streamlined, which we hope will help you improve the user friendliness of the tool moving forward in this grant cycle. So really quickly, what stays the same? It's still the case that all lower middle income and low income countries need to fill out the government health and RSSH table in the tool, but this is not required for upper middle income portfolios. One of the reasons that the government health is not required for upper middle income portfolios is because in the Global Fund's own co-financing requirements, we have differentiated our approach and we no longer ask for commitments for upper middle income portfolios specifically to health overall. So the tool reflects those changes. The disease gap overview table still remains mandatory for all funding request applicants. That's the same as GC7. The RSSH section is still applicable for all countries who want to make RSSH related co-financing commitments as part of their co-financing requirements in GC8. And one more important thing that we've retained is countries may choose to fill out the funding landscape table, either using National Strategic Plan cost categories or Global Fund modules. We do this because it's really important to provide that flexibility. Countries use different ways to both capture their historical spending as well as project that spending forward. And so the tool provides flexibility either to use the National Strategic Plan cost categories or use the cost categories for Global Fund modules. And that's a decision made as part of the funding request development process at the country level. So those things stay the same. What is different for GC8? We've tried to differentiate the use of the tool to really focus the tool on where it matters most. So one of the ways we've done that is with the detailed disease financial gap table. That is the table within the tool that captures the breakdown of financing of the national response at the intervention level. And in GC8, there is now more flexibility in how to use that table. So specific modules within that table only need to be completed where the total Global Fund contribution to any specific module is greater than 35%, and where the funding request is not based on the payment for results modality. And the reason here is we're trying to capture the information for the most important interventions that we will be supporting and that are reflected in the programmatic gap table. Not every single intervention, but the most important. It's part of that differentiation that we're trying to support in GCA. And the second major thing is greater differentiation in the use of the health products tab. Instead of asking for the health products tab to be mandatory everywhere, what the health products tab is only mandatory where the procurement and management of health products exceeds 35% of the total global fund disease allocation. In all other places, it can be used, but it's optional. And again, that's in the spirit of really trying to use the tool where it matters most. If there is a very significant percentage of health products in the global fund, in the funding request design, then we do want to collect that information. If it's smaller, then it's an optional. And we've also finally changed the formatting of the tool based on lots of lessons learned and feedback to try to make it more streamlined, easy to use, simple, and user-friendly. So that's an overview of the FLT, and I'll pause there. I would say as we move forward into GC8, really understanding the funding landscape in which we're operating and which we're developing global fund grants is even more critical than ever. And the use of this tool really early in country dialogue processes is a really helpful way for us to be able to understand that funding landscape. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Matt. As a reminder to everyone, we will be taking your questions in the chat. Apologies that the question and answer function is not working. Please leave your questions on the funding landscape table and the other annexes in the chat, and we will make sure that we can get to some of them to answer some of them at the end of our session today. So with that, let us go to the performance framework. And Sophia will be presenting on that.
Thank you, David. Hi, I'm Sophia Tesfaye. I am an associate specialist on the measurement team here at the Global Fund, and I'll be walking you through the changes to the performance framework for Grant Cycle 8. So just a bit of background, the performance framework lays out the impact, outcome, coverage indicators, work plan tracking measures where needed, and related targets against which results will be reported. Targets are national program targets in most cases and are based on available funding through all sources, including prioritized investments through the Global Fund funded grant. These indicators and work plan tracking measures form the basis for progress updates and disbursement requests by the PR to the Global Fund over the grant implementation period. Grant performance is assessed based on programmatic results of the coverage indicators or work plan tracking measures in the performance framework. Sorry, we can go to the next slide. I'll quickly go over the two pathways to submit the performance framework. So if developing a grant-ready funding request, the PRs develop an online performance framework and submit to the applicants and CCMs in Partner Portal. The CCM receives an Excel extract used for the funding request submission. If developing the classic funding request, the applicant CCM develops the Excel performance framework and uploads it for submission into Partner Portal. At the grant making stage, the PRs develop and finalize the performance framework online. And more information about the system and processes for the performance framework will be shared in a future information session. Next slide, please. So what's new? We'll start with the Excel performance framework. Overall enhancements have been made based on feedback received from various stakeholders. There have been no structural changes made to the form, just improvements to the user-friendliness of the overall form. This slide here has a summary of all those changes, but I'll go through a walkthrough with the screenshots of what to expect in the Excel. So next, please. Starting with the overview tab, point number 1 here, at the very top, you'll see that we've included this language section, which is preset by the Global Fund country teams, and they'll set the language for the entire performance framework form. Similarly, point number 3 we'll jump to. The implementation and AUP start and end dates are also set by the Global Fund. If there are any changes that are required to the language or any of these dates, just reach out to your Global Fund country teams and they're able to help you out with that in the Excel. Point number 4 shows that we've moved the reporting frequency and grouped it in with the programmatic reporting period table to allow for better visibility when changing the reporting period start and end dates. The light gray column where it says the 31st of December, 2028, 2029, and 2030, those dates are all changeable and you can change them based on the in-country reporting frequency and cadence. Next slide. Moving to the impact, outcome, and coverage indicators. Point number 5 shows that we have added within the comments for each of the indicators these sort of guidance headers that allow you to sort of group and customize the way that you put the comments into the cells. So the guidance headers are baseline, indicator definition, targets and assumptions, measurement and recording, grant contribution, and other. So for any additional contextual information that you need to input for those indicators, you can put them in these sort of grouped headers in the comment section. Number 6, we've split out the country and scope of targets cells into 2 separate columns, which allows for, again, better visibility when completing the form. If you're filling out a performance framework for a multi-country grant, you'll be able to select those different countries from the dropdown. And the scope of targets works the exact same way that it has in previous, where you can use the dropdown to select the scope of target for those specific indicators. This applies to the coverage indicator tab. Next, please. For the disaggregations, to make it easier to find the disaggregations, we have split them into 3 separate tabs. So impact, outcome, and coverage disaggregations each have their own tab. At the top of each of those tabs, number 8 shows that we've included this table, and it's maybe a bit difficult to see, but the numbers that are included in that disaggregation list table, 1, 2, 3, and 4, they're all hyperlinks. And so you're able to click on those hyperlinks and jump directly to the disaggregations that you need to fill out. So again, making that navigation a little bit easier for the disaggregations. Point 9 shows another place that we've added in these hyperlinks for the disaggregation. So on the main indicator pages for impact, outcome, and coverage, wherever there are required disaggregations, that age and gender that's shown in that in the screenshot there, the 3rd screenshot, that's also a hyperlink. If you click on that, it'll bring you directly to the disaggregation tab associated with that indicator and bring you directly to where you need to input data for those disags. Next slide. The work plan tracking measures tab. We've added in a work plan tracking measure category to the work plan tracking measures, again, to help with categorizing the WPTMs and the key activities. This category was included in the C19RM performance frameworks, and so we've included it into the GC8 PF as well. Last point that I'll point out in the work plan tracking measures tab is that we've updated the name for the criteria for completion. We've changed it to progress criteria, and we've split each of those progress criteria, started, advanced, and completed, into their own rows, again, making it easier to navigate each of those criteria as while filling out the form. Next slide. Just a couple of things to remember while filling out the performance framework form. There's an instructions tab at the very front of the form. So all the information that I presented today included in the slides, along with additional information on the other parts of the performance framework that have not changed. Those are all included in the instructions tab, and we encourage you to read those carefully prior to filling out the form. You can still freeze panes, hide columns and rows to make it even easier to navigate. But what we do ask is that if that you don't try and break the password protection or try and do any sort of inputs that aren't sort of expected for the performance framework Excel, as it can limit the functionality of the Excel. Again, all of this information is in the instructions tab within the form to help guide you as you're using it. Next slide. And just a sneak peek, we've brought the performance framework into an online modality. So I'll go over a couple of things quickly here. So you'll be able to input all the same information that's in the Excel performance framework online, all the indicators, work plan tracking measures, etc. There'll be real-time calculations of the percentages and automatic sorting of the indicators by disease and module. Disaggregations, instead of being shown on separate tabs, will be shown in line with their respective indicators. We've integrated data quality checks into the system where it'll check for common data entry errors. Warnings and critical warnings will alert the user to possible data inconsistencies and require justification to submit the form. However, there will be no blockers to form submission at the funding request stage. And the last point is that if you would like to work on the performance framework offline, it'll be available for download as an Excel extract. So you can continue to work on it and collaborate with others on the performance framework. But please note that there will be no import functionality for that Excel for the performance framework. Like we mentioned, there will be a future session, info session about the system and processes for the performance framework in a subsequent information session. So look out for that. That is all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Next, we will go to the detailed budget with some information on the health product management template. And for that today, Gyori and Dardan would like to invite you forward.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gyuri Kusturkov. I'm part of the Grant Finance Management team in the Global Fund, and we'll walk you through the detailed budget and the main changes. As you know, the detailed budget has been one of the key documents required throughout the different cycles for budgeting of the Global Fund investments. We have assessed the experience functionalities of the GC7 detailed budget template, and we believe that to a great extent it responds both to external and internal needs. This is why you're going to see that we are going to introduce very few changes with the objective to further make the budgeting process more efficient and hopefully also less time consuming. Next slide. So one important information is that the detailed budget continues to be on an Excel form. So all the applicants and PRs, irrespective of the stage, whether funding request or grant making, they will need to fill out the Excel form. As I mentioned, the overall structure of the detailed budget template remains unchanged. We have 5 different type of tabs which continue to be part of the Excel. The setup tab, which includes general grant information, it includes reporting setup and budget setup. The main information that the PRs will need to include continued to be the fiscal cycle of the grant, reporting periods, the FX rate, which will be communicated by the Global Fund centrally, the indirect cost recovery, if it applies, the type of PR and SRs, as well as the need for HPMT. There are some other information, but to a great extent, everything has been kept as in GC7. Other types of tab include the indirect cost recovery and investment landscape tab. These are continue to be as in GC7. In the ICR tab provides an estimate calculation of the indirect cost recovery. This is calculated using the indirect cost recovery percentages that are included in the setup tab and the information included into the non-HP and HP tab. The investment landscape tab provides an overview of the investment landscape using 3 categories: health products and supply chain management costs, program management related costs, and program activity related costs. We believe that this tab is quite useful because it shows a snapshot of the investment areas at the aggregated level. The summary tabs continue to be the same. We have a budget summary tab by module, cost grouping, and implementer. But the summary tab go also one level down, and there's also a summary at intervention, cost input, and source of funds budget tabs. Perhaps two of the most important tabs in the detailed budget continue to be the health product detailed budget tab and the non-health product budget detailed budget tab. As in GC7, we continue to have a few assumptions tab, which are standardized in terms of information that the applicants and PRs need to provide. These are the human resources tab, travel-related costs tab. We are now going to introduce with GC8 a new tab for health products assumptions, which, however, I would like to emphasize that it's applicable only for focused portfolios. And the detailed budget template has the free sheet for any other assumptions which the applicants and PRs would like to provide. And this tab could also be used for results-based financing modalities, where applicants can include any relevant information around costing targets, etc. Next slide. So I would like to go to and present very briefly the key changes to the detailed budget tab. We have categorized them in four different categories. One is the optimization of the non-health product tab. In GC7, there are three columns, namely unit cost, unit of measure, and total quantity for all years. The experience is that since the budgeting happens at module intervention, cost input, and implementer level, most of the budget lines contain different types of activities. So the unit cost and unit of measure, as well as the quantity, was an artificial numbers to come to the total amount needed for per year. This is why we have decided that they don't add value and might be even more confusing. This is why these columns are being removed from GC8 going forwards. For GC8, besides the module intervention, activity description, cost input, and implementer, there will be only columns which introduce total cash flow per year, both in payment currency and grant currency. We believe that this will significantly reduce the timing for the budget. The other change that we're going to introduce is that we're introducing additional drop-down menus under the source of funds, namely for unfunded quality demand and for climate and health additional funding. For unfunded quality demand, as you know, most of the applicants submit PAR during the funding request, which is reviewed and approved by TRP, and subsequently the approved PAR becomes unfunded quality demand. Although it won't be mandatory for the PRs to include this into the detailed budget, we'll strongly encourage the PRs to include at least some key critical activities under the non-HP tab unfunded quality demand, which will help and facilitate the conversion of the unfunded quality demand into actual activities should there be savings or additional funding along the grant life cycle of the grant. The HP assumptions tab, as I mentioned, is a new tab, and it has been designed to be used strictly for focused portfolios, where they will need to use the prescribed format to include HP-related information and then link this information with the detailed budget non-HP tab using the health products cost groupings 4 to 7. Another change that we have done in introducing for GC8 is an update and standardization of the reference data, which refers to module intervention and cost inputs. They are all aligned with the latest module framework and cost input dimensions, which will come with the updated budgeting guidelines. All of them have been updated, but also reduced, which, as I mentioned previously, we hope really this will make the budgeting process more efficient and also reduce the overall time required for budget completion. The last change that we're going to do is that we're going to remove the financial trigger tab. But these financial triggers will be moved online into the partner portal, where the applicants and PRs will be able to see live all the triggers that are going to be flagged. In some cases, they will need to provide also input and justification, but this will be done online and not in the Excel. I'm sure that you might be wondering how the HP information will flow into the detailed budget, because the detailed budget needs to capture all the investment. This is why I'm transferring to the next session to my colleague Dardan. Thank you. Over.
Good afternoon, all, and thank you, Georgi. This is Dardan. I am representing here the team of the Health Product Management Specialists. So the key change for the HPMT that we are announcing here is that we have migrated from Excel-based template into the GOS-based online platform, and this comes with lots of benefits. Now, the changes of how the new HPMT looks like will not be covered in this session because it's a completely newly designed template, and of course, if it was in Excel and now it's in GOS, the layout and everything, the steps that need to be followed are different. The principles remain the same, but we are going to have a separate session to introduce users on how to navigate the new template and all the details that come with it. So in the interest of time today, we are just going to talk about the key changes that we are introducing, and also when the HPMT is needed and not needed in the funding request preparation and submission. So as we have replaced the Excel version, the new HPMT then is accessible by PRs online in the partner portal upon CCM confirmation of nomination of the PR for each grant. And what we will see is an improved user experience, because now the new online tool is allowing for quick edits and easy product selection, moving away from a complex and heavy Excel file. And for those that are going to be the primary users, you will see that it runs very smoothly and it's very user-friendly. We also have simplified the detailed budget calculation. So now there is an increased PR visibility and control as to how the detailed budget lines are calculated. It will be up to the PR to allocate the budget amount against the selected interventions for each group of products. Now that the template is integrated with GF systems, so the HPMT uses the most recent updated product list with reference prices and lead times, thanks to data integration with the product data hub. So this will be automatically aligned and updated with the Wambo catalog, with the product data hub that we have, and all the details that we will populate there, the unit cost and the lead times, so that every time the user is in the HPMT platform, we'll have the latest information there automatically available. There's improved visibility, increased data visibility for the GF and PRs throughout the grant life cycle, enabled through the integration with the GF systems. One of the great features that we think will add a lot of value in the process is built-in data quality checks. So these data quality checks are installed at different points and will provide guidance to the user on potential data quality issues and missing information, will enable users to validate entries and provide comments before submitting, and will ensure overall quality of submission. And by just implementing these data quality checks, we also hope that this will reduce the time of iterations and will help both the PR and the HPMs and the LFA altogether to have a much easier process of updates and validation and all the steps that lead to submission and approvals. Next slide, please. So as I said, we are going to have a special session to introduce you to the platform. Requirements as when the HPMT is needed during the funding request and grant making are simpler than they may appear. So as you know, there are two types of funding requests that the PR can choose to follow. One is grant ready, which we hope that the majority of grants will be submitted in that format. And one is classic. So for the grant ready funding request, the submission of the HPMT is mandatory. So it's non-negotiable. When you submit, you need to submit the HPMT, and it's a prerequisite. So the key steps in this case is, or maybe I talk about key steps after. So, and if you submit the classic funding request, because the PR may choose to go, the CCMs may choose to go through the whole writing of the narrative and may have also some PRs that are questionable, not sure whether they are going to continue to be repeated PRs or not. So at the discretion of CCM, how they prefer to submit, if they are opting for a classic funding request submission, that would be a very different process. They are strongly encouraged to work on the HPMT. However, if they opt not to, they can still submit the funding request, but noting that they still have to work on the HPMT during the grant making. So what do they do in the funding request submission if it's a classic submission? In an interim, as Georgi said, that there is an HPM tab there. In the interim, they need to allocate the budget or to indicate the allocation of the budget that they intend to for the health product. But because the HPMT tab, if it's required and you click yes, you need to have the uploaded budget that comes from the GOS template that will be extracted from the HPMT. So if you don't have that because you haven't filled the HPMT yet in GOS, you shouldn't be clicking there in the detailed budget that HPMT is requested as yes if you don't have the HPMT. So in the interim, they need to go into the non-HP tab and fill the categories for the cost groupings 4 to 7, the lump sum amounts. Now, how they are going to determine the lump sum amounts? They need to use their own forecasting tools that they use regularly, which they will use also to inform the data that they are going to use in the HPMT. So it's up to them how they are going to use the assumptions to come up with a lump sum amount of the budgets for the cost grouping 4 and 7. And that in the interim, they will indicate that in the detailed budget non-P as a temporary budget indication. And as soon as this phase is over, the funding request submission, they will have to go again into the platform and work in all the details of the HPMT as expected. Whereas for grant-ready grants submissions, For them, this process is not needed because they will go into the detailed budget, select HPMT required, yes, and then once they select yes, they will just have to upload the detailed budget that will be extracted from the HPMT, which is fully aligned fully aligned with the detailed budget formatting, and that will be extracted from HPMT, inserted into the detailed budget, and submitted. Because as you know, HPMT and the detailed budget are always aligned at the grant submission and at the grant making stage. So for the focus countries, we will talk about that more later. But what is essential to understand is that for funding requests for the focus countries, HPMT is not requested. If a PR still wants to fill it out, okay, but we don't anticipate that. What would be then requested for the focus countries is that since they are still going to procure health products, but in much lower value and quantity, they will still need to provide some details, and they will do that directly in the detailed budget, the HP tab. So that is, as Georgi said, and I'm repeating, that is, again, reserved only for focus countries. So the main takeaway for today is, if the funding request follows grant-ready submission, HPMT is mandatory, and the detailed budget from HPMT will be extracted and inserted into the detailed budget. If the funding request is going to follow the classic style of submission, it is strongly encouraged because it will help the CCM and the PRs if they do that in parallel. However, if they cannot do it for some reason, they still need to give the lump sum amounts in interim in the budget lines that we mentioned, and then go back and work in the HPMT to have it ready for the grant making. I think in the interest of time, I pause here, and then we'll be happy to hand over back to you, David, and then happy to answer questions as we go forward.
Thank you, Dadam, and thank you, Georgi. Next, let us go to the programmatic gap tables, where Yera will be walking us through them.
Thank you, David. We can move ahead to the next slide, please. The programmatic gap tables serve as a core analytical tool to identify and assess coverage gaps for priority modules and indicators. These tables provide an analytical framework that supports strategic investment prioritization. In short, the programmatic gap tables connect epidemiological data, financing assumptions, and programmatic realities to support transparent prioritization and help applicants set targets that are both ambitious and credible within the available resource envelope. Next. In terms of the key changes for this grant cycle, note that there are only the HIV and TB gap tables in the funding request, because the malaria programmatic gaps should be estimated using the rollback malaria gap analysis tool. The HIV and TB GCA programmatic gap tables have been redesigned to reduce manual data entry that can be tailored to the applicant's investment prioritization and to include functionalities for a more user-friendly navigation experience. We will go over the key changes in the following slides. Next. Next, please. Yes. The HIV and TB programmatic gap tables are provided as two separate Excel files, but they share the same structure. Each file includes 5 tabs, moving from guidance and data entry to automated gap analysis and contributions. The first tab is the cover sheet. It provides step-by-step instructions and a color legend that helps applicants to identify errors and highlight critical gaps based on the data entered. Tabs 2 and 3 make up the Section A, where all data are entered. Section A, Tab 1 captures the numerators for priority indicators and modules, while Section A, Tab 2 captures the denominators and key estimates used to calculate gaps against country and global targets. The last two tabs are fully automated. Section B shows the remaining gaps against national and global targets by year, including the total unmet need for TB. Section C shows how targets are covered by available resources, the contribution by funding source, and the average global fund contribution per module over the implementation period. Next, please. One important enhancement to the PGTs for GC8 are more comprehensive instructions and guidance. In the first tab, instructions are provided for each section, and we strongly recommend these are carefully read before completing the programmatic gap table. Next, please. It also includes indicator-specific guidance in Section A, Tab 1, to support the use of available data in establishing the assumptions to split the targets by sources. Next, please. Additionally, Section A, Tab 2 includes indicator-specific guidance to guide the applicant identifying relevant data sources, other guidance documents for global fund indicators to adequately provide the denominators that will allow adequate operationalization of the coverage indicator, and also adequate estimation of the gaps. Next, please. Another enhancement in the GC8 PGTs is that data entry will be provided for elementary indicators. Hence, Tab 1 of Section A contains numerator data, and Tab 2 of Section A contains denominator data. Module and indicator selection can only be done in one tab, which is the Section A, Tab 1 for the numerators. The data entry fields are only enabled after the selection of the priority modules. In the HIV programmatic gap table, applicants are requested to select the priority module first. Then the selection of indicators can be tailored for the priority module. In the TB programmatic gap table, applicants only need to select the priority modules because each priority module only has one indicator. For tailoring the module and indicator selection, applicants are encouraged to consider as well their country team's advice. Next, please. It is important to note that once the priority modules have been selected in the HIV and TB programmatic gap tables, all indicators of the priority module will appear automatically selected. Applicants then can deselect the indicators by selecting No from the drop-down list in the column for indicator selection. The selection of indicators in Section A, Tab 1 will modify the data entry fields in all the sections accordingly. Next, please. This new programmatic gap table also has new functionalities for a more user-friendly experience and easy reference of critical aspects to inform the narrative and other documents of the funding request. For example, red-colored fields will always indicate errors which the applicant should correct before submission. More information about how to correct these errors generated are included in the cover sheet, scrolling down through the instructions all the way down to the color legend. Red and orange fonts in automated calculations can highlight where gaps are critical or country targets are poorly covered by available resources. The ranges used are further explained in the color legend in the cover sheet tab. Blue and black fonts, on the contrary, will show when indicator targets are vastly covered by resources available, and therefore the gaps are not considered critical. Next, please. Hence, orange and red fonts colors will, in automated calculations of gaps in the Section B, should be considered by the applicants to prioritize modules and interventions for the PAR. Next, please. Another interesting functionality that applicants can use in the GC8 programmatic gap table is that you can increase or decrease rows and columns width, filter only selected indicators in all the sections, and freeze panels to easily navigate all columns while maintaining a view of your key columns and headings. Additionally, in section C, the PGTs will highlight in yellow when the Global Fund average contribution by module is considered highly relevant, meaning 35% or higher. Therefore, these high-impact and core portfolio applicants are required to complete additional detailed financial information for the specific priority module in the detailed disease financial gap tab of the financing landscape table. The instructions include more information to explain how this proportion is calculated with the data provided by the applicant. Next. The financial landscape table and the programmatic gap tables are complementary tools that together support the funding request. The programmatic gap table translates available financial resources into people reached through priority indicators. To do this, applicants consider not only the financial landscape, but also programmatic feasibility. This includes health system enablers and constraints, such as human resources, supply chains, and health information systems, and clearly documenting these assumptions behind their target ambition. Completing the programmatic gap table early in the funding request process supports prioritization. It helps clarify ambition, sustainability, and transition considerations that are later described in the narrative of the funding request. The gap analysis in section B of the programmatic gap table should directly inform the PAR. Priority modules and interventions included in the PAR should address the critical gaps identified for priority indicators. Finally, section C of the programmatic gap table must align with the performance framework. The coveted targets included in the performance framework should be consistent with the targets shown as coveted by available resources in the programmatic gap table. This ensures a clear justification for national target ambition and for the Global Fund contribution, while also accounting for target scope, availability of funding, and the share of contributions by source. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Yera and to all of our other presenters. We will now go to a round of questions and answers. We definitely received a lot of questions already, so we will try to answer the ones we can. We have a little bit more time than we had started, so what we'll do is we'll have one round of asking 3 to 5 questions per annex, and then if we have time, we'll go back and do a second round. So with that, then we do have some general questions coming up. Oh, apologies, my video was turned off. We do have some general questions coming up. And so to respond to these, I'd like to invite Lindsay Smith to come on camera and to speak to these.
Hi, David. Thanks very much. So there's a couple of general questions that have been posed that are on the slide here that we'll be responding to verbally as well to make sure that the interpreters are able to interpret these into French or Spanish. So the first question is, when will all the tools for GC8 be available at the country level? And the answer to this question is that the Global Fund is updating the Grant Cycle 8 application materials now, and we will be publishing the standard annexes on the Global Fund website in the second half of February after the Global Fund board meeting. These templates that are system generated are the performance framework, the detailed budget, and the PAR, the prioritized above allocation request. These will be available to CCMs through the partner portal after the CCM confirms their funding request details, which they will do following the receipt of the allocation letter. And as a reminder from earlier sessions, we are expecting that we will be able to share those allocation letters in March. The second question is, if a country has a surplus of financial resources for GC7, is it envisaged to deduct this amount from the envelope to be allocated for that country's GC8 allocation? And this is a really good question to clarify because it's important that we all understand that the allocation for each disease component can only be used during the relevant allocation utilization period for that grant cycle. So any remaining funds from the grant cycle 7, HIV, TB, or malaria allocation, if they're unused at the start of the indicated allocation utilization period for GC8, will not be additional to the GC8 allocation. So if there are unused funds at the end of GC7, they will not be able to be used in the GC8 allocation utilization period. And the last question on this slide is about focused portfolios. Please describe the differences of all the required information for focused portfolios. So our response to this, as I think we mentioned at the beginning, is that the differentiated requirements for focused portfolios will be explained in the information session that we will have specifically for focused portfolios in March. Generally, less detail will be required for focused portfolios across all of the funding request annexes.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. And just to quickly add on that first point, that included in the annexes and the application materials will be the modular framework. So that will also be shared in the second half of February. And so with that, let's go to some questions related to the specific annexes. Let's go to the next slide, please. And if I could invite Matt to come back and speak some more questions on the funding landscape table.
Sure. Thanks, David. And thank you very much for the engagement and the good questions. So on the first question, should the FLT reflect the total NSP required? So in one particular part of the FLT, in the disease financial gap overview table, and that's where we look at the overall funding, the aggregate funding of the national response. There is a request to include the previous, the current, and the anticipated resources to meet the needs of the National Strategic Plan. So there is a request to include that information so we have a sense of where the overall amounts of the national response are financed from. It does not pre-populate this information, though. That information has to be filled out by the applicant when they're using the tool. The second question is quite similar. Does the FLT cost the National Strategic Plan? The funding landscape table is not a tool that is used to cost national strategic plans. In fact, quite the opposite. It has to pick the costs from the costed NSPs, and it uses that information to provide the funding landscape overall in which we are developing the Global Fund grants. The third is around how do we define RSSH in the FLT? We actually do this by using the same boundaries or categories of RSSH that are in the modular framework. So in GC8, we're trying to make sure that we have as much coherence between the RSSH type of activities that we would finance in our grants and the RSSH activities that are financed by other contributions. And so we use the same modular framework RSSH categories as the basis for that. The question might also be asking, do we have to fill out all of the RSSH pieces? And the answer is no. There's optionality in the RSSH. Where we would like the RSSH detailed is where we expect those RSSH contributions to be part of the co-financing discussion. Of course, applicants can fill out as much as they would like, but we really want to focus it there on where we expect those RSSH where we expect that there will be RSSH related co-financing contributions. To the next question on the PR. So this is a document that is submitted by the CCM as part of the funding request package. In terms of does the PR need to be involved, it's a hard question to answer because of the diversity of PRs that we have across the Global Fund portfolio. Where PRs can be helpful in terms of supporting the information on the financing of the national response in the health system, it's very good to have them involved. For example, we have a number of places across our portfolio where PRs are ministries of health, ministries of finance. And so engaging them in this process is very helpful. So it's really going to depend on the country context. On the question number 5, is 35% programmatic contribution or budget contribution by the Global Fund? So just to step back for a second, this question is referring to what I talked a little bit around differentiation. So as a reminder, in the detailed disease financial gaps, so where we break down the national response by the underlying interventions or pieces, we've tried to differentiate how much needs to be filled out in that. And this is actually, the 35% is actually referring to the programmatic contribution that is captured in the programmatic gap table, which my colleague Gira spoke about. In many ways, the best way to think about this is really, we're trying to differentiate, collecting the financial information, focused on those places where there is the most reliance on the Global Fund for reaching the programmatic contributions. So rather than asking for that financial information inevitably everywhere, targeting it toward where we have the most reliance on the Global Fund for reaching those programmatic targets. I hope that helps clarify the 5 and the 6, and Gira, please feel free to come in if needed. Number 6, the answer is it's calculated by looking at the average proportion of results across all the indicators in that module. And Gira can come in and explain as well. And then on 7, the countries are not respecting their co-financing commitments. So I think the story on co-financing actually differs heavily across the portfolio. We have a lot of countries who have been very significantly taking on more of the costs of national responses, making really good targeted commitments, and realizing those commitments. And this is something that I think we need to see even more in GC8, given the critical importance of domestic financing and the increased focus on supporting conversations at the national level around transition and sustainability. There certainly are places where we see gaps in the realization of co-financing commitments, and we're doing a lot to try and make sure that we are following up on that. Things like better monitoring and more consistent monitoring, more consistent approaches to taking action when countries aren't realizing those requirements. And so as we move into GC8, continuing to focus on this and focusing even more will be quite critical. I'm going to hold there.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. Next, let's go to the next slide, and we'll have Sophia come back to answer some questions around the performance framework.
Thanks, David. So starting with the first question, for the target setting in the performance framework, do we need to specifically focus on targets associated with the Global Fund investments, or country level targets are considered? Will targets be based on resources available through Global Fund or through all sources? So in most cases, the performance framework includes the national program targets supported with all available funding, which includes the Global Fund investments. For some specific project level indicators, specific subnational targets may be allowed, and it's best to reach out to your Global Fund country teams who can provide further guidance on this. Moving on to the next question, number 2, definitions of numerators and denominators is required. However, sometimes the definition depends on the country available data or system. Kindly clarify. So in the performance framework, the data type, whether it's numerator, denominator, or percentage only, or number only, this is all predefined. So the Global Fund supports setting up and strengthening of reporting systems for any specific country scenarios. Again, discuss it with your representative or your respective Global Fund country teams. I'll move to question 4. What do you mean that real-time calculation in online performance framework? Any changes in reporting intervals or reporting frequency to the portal? What are the purposes and expectations from this real-time calculation? So real-time calculations mean that as the numerator and denominator are entered into the form, the percentages and the annual targets will be automatically calculated, eliminating any need for manual entry. And then last question, so number 3, sorry for jumping around. In the last performance framework, every time clicking on the disaggregation tab made the tool slow. Changing PC did not solve this problem, so please make the formulas a bit light. So in the Excel for GC8, we've split the disaggregation tabs, as I mentioned before. And so in splitting the disaggregation tabs into those separate impact, outcome, and coverage tabs, it's made the navigation between each of those elements via those hyperlinks a much faster process. So I think that is all for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sophia. Next, let's go to Georgi with more questions on the detailed budget. And then following that, we'll have Dardana up with some questions on the HPMT specifically.
Thanks, David. So a few questions came on the detailed budget. The first one, an important one, if and when should we expect updates on the Global Fund's guidelines for grant budgeting? So we have been working on a revision and updating the budgeting guidelines for the past few months, and they're in their final stage of revision. So once finalized, as usual, we're going to publish the budgeting guidelines on the Global Fund website. But we are working around the clock, and the overall goal and aim is that the budgeting guidelines and all the other supporting documents are made available no later than the time when the countries are going to receive their allocation letters, and we'll start working on the detailed budget. Second question, how will you link the assumption to the detailed budget lines if there are no unit costs? Because each budget line has a breakdown in the assumptions. So in the case of the new updated detailed budget, the annual amounts from the assumption tabs related to each budget line will need to be manually linked to the relevant year in the non-HP tab. And this will allow to all PRs a more flexible approach to link amounts from different assumptions into the same budget line. Third question is, don't we have the tab for the assumptions others, or we can use the free sheet? Thank you for this question. The assumptions other tab in the detailed budget will still be part of the detailed budget Excel and will be available to be used for budgeting purposes. Question number 4, unit cost, unit of measure, and total quantity are removed from the non-HP tab only. Are they still required in the assumption tab? Yes, correct. They are still required and will be part of the assumptions tab in their predefined tables, which will need to be filled, and this will show the PRs and will facilitate the inclusion of information in the assumption tab. Is there another question for detailed budget?
We have one question on the next slide, please.
What is the differentiation between the information that goes into the detailed budget's unfunded quality demand section versus what would normally go into the prioritized above allocation request? So the unfunded quality demand includes only those prioritized above allocation request activities which have been approved by the TRP. So for budgeting purposes at grant making stage, the PRs shall include only unfunded quality demand activities with the relevant assumption details. As I mentioned during the session, the inclusion of unfunded quality demand is not mandatory, but it's highly encouraged, and it would be best when the PRs come to this stage to consult with the country team and decide which of the UQD activities are most critical and mostly likely to be implemented, and those should be included into the detailed budget. And if you allow me one last remark related to the first question, besides the guidelines for grant budgeting, we are going also to update the instructions for completion of the detailed budget, which will cover most of the questions that we won't be able perhaps to cover during the session. But as you know, the instructions include detailed guidance for all the tabs and examples, and we believe that this will really help the PRs when they start actually doing the detailed budget. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Georgi. Let's go to the HPMT when they're done.
Let me just flip through pages. So there are some questions that are a bit similar with each other. I just will give the context because there was one explaining the expected advantages and some concerns about the internet connectivity. So the online HPMT has been developed and tested internally multiple times with inputs from subject matter experts across the Global Fund. And we followed a similar approach with other system and tool developments. So what we will do next is targeted user acceptance demos and we will collect feedback from PRs starting next week, and we will collect insights for future enhancements and to support our change management and the user guidance development. So we are aware of the challenges that many colleagues face with internet connectivity. And as such, we have aimed to keep the online tool as light as possible and also included features that are automatic savings. So even if there is a breakdown, the work that they will do will not be lost. And then there are features where they can extract the work that they have already done in Excel form if they want to review it and edit before they come back and work on the platform again. So there is the question 10 is about the HPMT. Is there any opportunity so that the HP details breakdown can be found in details budget as well? Because opening too large file, I think I answered this because you are not going to work in parallel with two Excel tables. This one that is online and then the detailed budget that you have in Excel. So there's the likelihood of these two crashing at the same time, I think, has been minimized because this is following, the HPMT is following a different format and it's now web-based. About the HPMT PSM cost, there was a question if PSM costs are captured in a separate sheet. We are keeping a separate sheet for the PSM costs, but we have simplified the way how the costs are going to be reflected and calculated. And these details will be shared when we have our separate session on guiding you through all the steps of the HPMT. When we are getting the HPMT online, it's going to be the PRs will receive access to the online HPMT once the funding request process is launched. So after the allocation letters are shared. So this will follow all the steps that normally we will follow for all other templates that the PRs are requested to fill. So HPMT information will be included in that bundle, and once they receive that information, the portal will be open and guidance will be there for them to follow step by step how to fill it in. How the HPMT data will be fed into the detailed budget. So the online HPMT includes a budget allocation step. Upon completion of the online HPMT, there is an Excel extract downloaded. So the information in the Excel is copied and pasted into the appropriate tab in the detailed budget. This is pretty much how it is also in the current HPMT. It's just now that you will have to extract it from the platform, and then as an Excel extract, you have to upload that into the detailed budget. So in principle, it's not that much change. So I think that captures all. And you know where to find us. We can always answer more questions. Over to you, David.
Thank you so much, Dadan. Let's go to the next slide. Then this is going to be our last section. We will have Yira to present or to answer questions on the programmatic gap tables. A quick reminder, because I've seen some questions come in on the chat, is that these slides, or at least the presentation part of the slides, will soon be available on the Global Fund website on the information sessions page, where you can also watch recordings of this session and other sessions that have already happened. So with that, then I will hand it off to Ira.
Thank you, David. Before starting with these questions, I just want to complement Matthew's response regarding a question around how the 35% contribution of the Global Fund will be calculated. And yes, it's based on the assumptions that the applicants will include in the programmatic gap tables, which consider both financial and programmatic elements to reach the targets. So yes, it's 35% contribution to programmatic targets for priority indicators. But the good news is that the applicant will not have to calculate it. The programmatic gap table in section C will do that for you and will highlight when this is higher than 35% so that you can always remember that this is a module where we would like more detailed information in the disease funding landscape table. Then the first question with regards to the malaria programmatic gap table, which is not yet available. Yes, the link will be soon made available also in our Global Fund website. The second question is that with regards to whether we will have the programmatic gap tables online like the PF. So please note that the programmatic gap tables will remain as an Excel file that applicants will be able to download them from our website. So these will not be online. You can download them from the Global Fund website. The third question is with regards to programmatic gap tables being required for RSSH. No, this is no longer required. This is correct. But please note that 2 tabs have been included in the RBN malaria tool for applicants with a malaria component. 2 tabs that before were included in the community health workers gap table have been included there. And the last question, with regards to our guidance to always start with the programmatic gap tables and then the performance framework to inform the targets. Yes, this continues to be the same. And the reason is because, as we explained before, the programmatic gap tables helps you to justify and document how we are setting targets with the right level of ambition and which resources we are considering that can contribute to reach those targets. However, note that there is only a very small number of indicators that will feed into the programmatic gap table. So not all indicators in the PF required to be fill in the programmatic gap table. Hope that this clarifies. Otherwise, there's always more space for questions and also clarifications with your country team.
Great. Thank you, Ira. So we are getting close to time. I will invite Lindsay to come back for 1 or 2 more quick questions, and then we'll just have some closing comments. Thank you to all of our presenters so far today.
Thanks very much, David. Okay, a couple of final general questions. We did get some questions related to the Excel collaboration file and is it available to CCMs? So I just wanted to take us a step back. And as we described in the previous session on using the full review form for the core and high impact portfolios to complete their total funding request, it is up to the CCM to select whether or not to use the classic submission pathway or the grant-ready submission pathway. If the CCM selects the grant-ready submission pathway, then they request the PR to complete the performance framework and detailed budget at the grant level. Those are prepared by the PR and then they're submitted to the CCM for review. The CCM receives an Excel extract and they review them and they can decide whether or not to either accept them as is or to request a change to these files. And then it's up to the CCM to determine the final documents that they then submit to the Global Fund for the funding request stage. At the grant making stage, the PR will then actually submit directly to the Global Fund. But at the funding request stage, the PR, if they've been asked to develop the grant level performance framework and detailed budget, they would be submitting them first for review to the CCM. The second question is a little bit similar, but slightly different. Are all these forms completed online? and will it be possible to make corrections? So the CCM, as I mentioned, chooses which pathway to use. And if they select the grant ready submission pathway and ask the principal recipient to complete the grant level PF and detailed budget, the performance framework is completed online for the grant level by the PR. The detailed budget is completed in Excel offline. If the CCM is using the classic funding request submission pathway, both the performance framework and the detailed budget will be completed in Excel. And then question 3 on this slide, which document should be filled first? And so the consensus from the Global Fund is that ideally the programmatic gap table and the funding landscape table should be completed together. And ideally those should be completed first. Then, as you think about either the funding request level or the grant level, performance framework and detailed budget, they are documenting how the Global Fund allocation funding is proposed to be invested. So they should be completed next. And the PAR should be completed last. So part of this overall question was at what order would the PAR come in? This documents the remaining prioritized interventions that cannot be funded through the allocation amount. So that can only be known after the PF and the detailed budget have been completed, and it's been determined by the applicant how far the allocation funding can stretch and what remains that is a priority, but there is no sufficient allocation funding for. So I just want to finalize this comment, though, by saying that it's likely that this may be the right order, but it's likely that these documents would need to be iterated. We would need to go back through these documents after the final grant or the funding request level PF and detailed budget are completed. It may require then updating the programmatic gap table and the funding landscape table if indeed funding is identified through the Global Fund allocation to fund some of those previously identified gaps. So this is an iterative process to prepare the whole funding request submission, but this is our initial recommendation on how to start. Thanks. I'll pass back over to David to close.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. So very quickly, just a quick reminder. Thank you so much for joining us for this information session. We are now more than halfway through our current planned calendar of information sessions. Reminder that you can go to the Global Fund website, to the information sessions page on the country resources portion of the website. You can see, you can watch the recordings of the sessions that have already taken place. You can download the slides related to those. The slides and the recording of this session will be available there soon. There's also some upcoming sessions. Highly recommend you register for those and join us. I'm really looking forward to the one on sustainability, transition, co-financing, and value for money. Definitely encourage you to join for that as well. Reminder that today we did not cover the differentiation for these annexes for focus portfolios, and we will be covering some of these differentiations at the session planned for 24th of March 26. Register for that if you haven't already. As also mentioned, there are going to be some other information sessions, some webinars, some planned videos coming up on some of these annexes. And finally, all of the annexes and the applicant guidance will be ready towards the end of February. So we look forward to being able to share that with you soon. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to supporting you all as we go through Grant Cycle 8. Take care and have a wonderful day.